So now that I have the basic snowman model established, the next thing that I want to do is I want to start to think about the arms. And I want to kind of do this traditional stick arm modeling for my snowman. And the way that I'm going to do this is I'm going to look at a new technique. It's a technique, a workflow that's usually referred to as box modeling. And in order to demonstrate this, I'm going to create a new document. Now, once I typically jump into a new document. I chose File, New, or Command N to create a new document. Whenever I want to explore a new tool or wrap my head around a workflow or just kind of experiment with something, a lot of times I'll generate a new document and experiment within this temporary project. Now I'm going to create a new cube object just for a moment. And before I start modifying this, I'm quickly going to go to display and I'm going to change this from Gerard shading to Gerard shading with lines. And the idea here is I get to see a little bit more information in my viewport so that I can better understand the geometry of this object. And the next thing I'm going to do is with the cube selected, I'm going to go to the Object Manager and I'll just bump up the segmentation in all directions, so X, Y, and Z, to 3. And so I get this kind of tic-tac-toe board that's placed across my parametric primitive. And so what I want to do is I want to start to look at this technique of extrusion. And there's a couple of different ways to extrude in Cinema 4D, and what we're going to do is just do a simple polygon extrusion. And the way that we do this is we got to convert our object from a parametric primitive to a polygon object, and I can do that by clicking on this icon here in the top left-hand corner, the Make Editable. I can also press the C key on the keyboard, so I'll tap the C key, and now I have this cube object. And again, this is just for experimentation. When I start to make my arm, I'll start with a cube, but it's not going to be in this proportion. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the Live Select tool, and now I need to decide which component that I want to use. And in the case of extrusions, you'll almost always use go into polygon mode. So I have points, edges, and polygons. I've selected the Live Select tool. I've gone into the polygon mode. So now as I roll my mouse around this 3D object, you'll see that's highlighting the individual polygon faces. Now when I click one time to select that face, you'll see that I have a polygon selected. And it's important to note that every polygon has what's called a normal direction. And the normal direction is the direction which is perpendicular to the polygon surface. And so as I click on this blue axis points in the direction of its normal direction. And it's not so important that we keep in mind the normal direction at this point, but just know that when we start to extrude, we're extruding in the direction of its normal. So I'll just click on this polygon, and with that polygon selected, I can go to Mesh, the Mesh pull-down menu, Create, and I'm looking for Extrude. And I'll select the Extrude tool, and you'll also notice when I roll my mouse over the Extrude tool, down here in the bottom left-hand corner, and pretty much any tool in Cinema 4D, when you roll over it, down in the left-hand corner, it'll tell you what the shortcuts are. And I got a couple of different shortcuts. There's one that says M, title T, comma D. So the D key on the keyboard will quickly allow me to select the extrude tool, but I'll just use the menu while I'm here. Now the workflow is that once I have a polygon selected, what I can do is I'll roll my mouse out into the negative space of Cinema 4D or in the perspective viewport, and what I'll do is I'll click and drag to the right or to the left. You'll notice that when I drag to the left, it pushes the polygon back into the model. When I drag to the right, it extrudes the polygon out of the model. When I release the mouse, what I've done is I've just added to this geometry. I've added geometric information. If I click and drag to the right again, I get another extrusion. So the idea here is that pretty much every time we click and drag to the right or to the left, what we're doing is we're extending that surface, we're extruding that polygon, and adding more geometric or polygon information to this model. You'll notice that I currently have the extrusion tool selected, and if you look at my mouse, you can see that there's a little extrude tool icon underneath the mouse. I can still roll around and select another polygon, but once I select that polygon, what I want to do is I want to back my mouse away from the selection and click and drag to the left or to the right. And the idea here is that if I roll my mouse over the axes of that polygon, I can click and drag and move that in space, and that's not necessarily what I want to do. In some cases I'll want to do that while I'm extruding. But just know that if I select a polygon and I roll over one of the axes and I click and drag, I'm not extruding. What I'm doing is I'm moving that polygon surface and it's deforming the model. If I roll my mouse off to one side and I click and drag to the right, I'm extruding that surface up. Now, I'm going to Command Z to undo that, because I could also click and drag in some cases and push that surface back into our model. Okay, so I've just extruded. I'm going to Command Z to undo that, and I'll click and drag to the right. I'll click and drag to the right again, and each time I do that, I'm adding information to the model. So I'm making my model a bit more complex. Now, this extrusion tool, there's a couple of different ways to get to the extrusion tool, as I mentioned. I'll just change the tool so you can see this. I can press the D key on the keyboard, and that brings up extrusion, and that's my preferred way to get there. But you might have also noticed that there was an M title T key, which means that there's a quick menu system inside Cinema 4D, and if I tap the M key, I bring up some of the modeling tools. And if I look through that menu, each item on that menu has another list of shortcuts to bring up a particular tool. And if you look all the way down to T, it says extrude. So M followed by the T key will load the extrusion tool. And the reason I show you the quick menus is because there are some things that are just much easier to select under these submenus instead of digging through this tool set up here. In addition to that, there's one other way that we can quickly pull up these tools. I'm just going to change back to the Move tool, and I'm going to roll my mouse way over to the right side here, and you'll notice there's a Layout pull-down menu. And by default, we're looking at the standard panel layout in Cinema 4D. And if I click and reveal that drop-down menu, you can see there's a lot of different modes that I can go into. And these different modes are just going to emphasize different panels. So there's an animation layout, there's some UV editing layout, some painting layout, and sculpting, and so on. And what I'm looking for is the modeling layout. And if I choose modeling, you'll see that what happens is that certain panels are de-emphasized. In fact, if I look down underneath the perspective viewport, I've lost my timeline and I've lost my material manager temporarily. And in its place now, I have all of these modeling tools, and this is a very convenient way to work. If you're going to work on a model for a while that requires a lot of modeling, it's not a bad idea to change the layout to modeling. And down here you can see that there's the extrusion tool right there. I have my mouse rolled over it, I'll select the extrusion tool, and now I can get back to the task of extruding. I mentioned the normal direction because, again, the idea is when we have a polygon selected, we're always going to extrude perpendicular to its surface. We can later move it and rotate it and kind of move it around to get that surface in the position that we want, but for now we're just going to do a simple extrusion in a direction. And again, we'll take this technique and we'll apply it to our stick. We'll start off with a cube and we'll start to do some extrusions and make it look a little bit more organic and do some branching, but we'll do that in the next presentation.